It's Monday, August 4th, 2008, and it's 4:20 somewhere in the world. I'm your host, Radical Russ Belville. Produced and distributed by the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws in Washington, D.C., this is your NORML Daily Audio Stash, the growing truth about cannabis. Welcome to the most popular podcast regarding marijuana in all of America and all the world, featuring interviews with scientists, politicians, doctors, prohibition policy activists, regular cannabis consumers, musicians, and NORML staff and NORML's board of directors, along with music and comedy no other podcast can offer. You can always find out more about our show at our website, stash.norml.org, and continue the education and conversation on our blog as well. We're ending marijuana prohibition with education, one listener at a time. The podcasting and blogging technology for the NORML Daily Audio Stash is provided by Red Aphid Interactive Media. For your professional web design needs, visit redaphid.com. Good day and welcome back to the Daily Audio Stash. I've been getting so many great emails from you listeners out there at stash@norml.org. If you have suggestions or comments about the podcast, please let me know. I'm always glad to take criticism and compliments. More of the compliments, but we'll take the criticism too. Coming up on today's stash, we've got the final installment, the third part of my interview with Wendy Chapkus, Richard Webb, and Valerie Corral regarding the book Dying to Get High, which chronicles the advent of medical marijuana in the state of California and the birth of the WHAM Collective, Women's Alliance for Medical Marijuana. Wendy Chapkus, the author, just let me know that the Daily Audio Stash got noted by one of the major sociological organizations out there. So any new sociologists listening to the podcast, welcome to the show. Also on today's stash, we've got a great interview with Chris Crane from the Students from Sensible Drug Policy, unfortunately bringing us bad news about the aid elimination penalty that was recently reauthorized as part of the Higher Education Act. As you know, this is the part of the drug war that means that college students that are busted for possession of marijuana lose their financial aid. So we'll catch you up with the latest on that story. Also, a couple of updates coming up here in our hemp headlines. One on that Culver City raid, some pretty scary stuff that just came out of that regarding a photograph of one of the DEA agents. So stick around for those hemp headlines. All right, everybody, let's strap in and get ready for another week of cannabis news and interviews that you can use. It's time for your NORML Daily Audio Stash. It's not your parents' prohibition. The 2008 NORML Conference will be held Friday, October 17th through Sunday, October 19th at the Doubletree Hotel and Executive Meeting Center, Berkeley Marina in Berkeley, California. NORML is excited and pleased to convene the organization's 37th annual conference in Berkeley and additionally look forward to NORML social events planned in Oakland. Transportation from the Doubletree Berkeley Marina to events in Oakland will be provided to NORML's guests. We have negotiated extremely favorable room rates of $159 per night. Please make your room reservations early before the block of reduced rate rooms has been exhausted. NORML always sells out its allocated discount priced rooms. Reserve your room today. To enjoy the full scope of NORML's 37th annual conference, you and your friends should plan to arrive in Berkeley no later than 3 p.m. on Thursday, October 16th. Plan to depart for home on Monday, October 20th. Similar in format to last year's NORML conference in Los Angeles, the first 2 days are presented in typical plenary and breakout sessions. The conference's last day is co-sponsored with the new Amsterdam University and NORML's legal committee of criminal defense attorneys, and will feature a day of unique classroom-style learning not yet found in American academia. The Sunday-only session teaches participants and the legal and business best practices for medical cannabis dispensaries and cooperatives.
Just say no.
Experimented with marijuana and didn't inhale.
Just say no.
Great.
Just say no.
I never used marijuana.
Sorry.
Just say no.
Frequently. That was the point.
Just say no.
Has that marijuana made it back up here yet?
Just say no.
One major responsibility is to encourage people to use less drugs.
Just say no.
This is not medicine. This is a Cheech and Chong show.
Just say no.
Marijuana remains a dangerous drug.
Just say no.
If you're seriously interested in expanding your cannabis activism, you need to be there at NORML's 37th Annual National Conference. It's not your parents' prohibition. Now it's time to take a look at the latest stories about marijuana from news organizations across America and around the world in our normal daily audio stash, Hemp Headlines. The Blackwater DEA photo scrubbed from the Los Angeles Times. We heard some noise outside, and then the door literally burst in, and the DEA came in full combat gear, told everybody to get on the floor and put their hands behind their heads. It was like literally an episode of 24 when they bust in on a terrorist cell. That's the description of the Culver City DEA dispensary raid I told you about last Friday. Who knew that the terrorist cell description would have another frightening parallel? There's a picture of an agent unloading DEA evidence that appeared on the Los Angeles Times website, and that agent is wearing a Blackwater t-shirt. Blackwater is the private security firm with millions of dollars in no-bid U.S. government contracts in Iraq. The photo was published by the Los Angeles Times as part of its photo slideshow online accompanying the news story about the raid. Or it was published. If you click that photo slideshow link that we have at our blog, stash.normal.org, you'll find that the 7-picture slideshow has now been reduced to 6. The Blackwater man is no longer there. As of this podcast, that photo is still online at the Times, but it's an orphan, which just means that there are no links that are going to that photo. You have to know what the link is. Along with this caption that reads, DEA agents remove evidence from Organica Collective after the business was raided by federal agents. Now, maybe the LA Times took the photo down because the caption was inaccurate. If he's working for Blackwater, he's not part of, quote, DEA agents. But then why not just fix the caption? Maybe he is a DEA agent and he just got the Blackwater shirt as swag at some convention, and the LA Times took the picture down to protect the identity of this hip, young, ponytailed, goatee-sporting, undercover narc with a RoboCop-sized gun on his hip. It would be nice to know whether or not our Federal Drug Enforcement Administration is outsourcing federal police duties to private mercenary armies like Blackwater. After all, they've done such a bang-up job with domestic policing in Iraq, like shooting up 17 unarmed civilians in the square without provocation. The Iraqi government revoked their licenses and kicked Blackwater out of the country, but, of course, they're still there. The Iraqi government has learned what the California government has learned. When it's engaged in a war on nouns like drugs or terror, the U.S. government will do whatever it damn well pleases. California Appeals Court rules medical marijuana patients need not get doctor renewals. From the Daily Breeze. 3 justices from the 2nd District Court of Appeals decided Wednesday that state law does not require a patient to periodically review a doctor's recommendation regarding medical marijuana use. In addition, the justices ruled that it should be left to a jury to determine if the amount of marijuana a patient possesses is related to their medical needs or exceeds the law. Christopher Windus, age 39, was arrested December 14, 2004 after police officers searched his room at the Palos Verdes Inn and found approximately 1.6 pounds of marijuana. Before his trial began, Windus tried to convince Torrance Superior Court Judge Andrew Kaufman that he should be allowed to present a defense based on California's Compassionate Use Act of 1996. In 2003, the state legislature clarified the law to allow qualified patients or caregivers to have no more than 8 ounces of dried marijuana with a doctor's recommendation. Dr. William Eidelman told the judge that he consulted with Windus in 1999 and 2001 and gave him written recommendations for the medical use of marijuana for chronic back pain. Eidelman said Windus ingested marijuana, which requires 4 to 8 times more of the drug than smoking it. He said it would be appropriate for Windus to have 3 to 6 pounds of marijuana in his possession. After hearing from the witnesses, the judge said he found Windus was legitimately a medical marijuana patient, but that no physician had recommended he possess more than 8 ounces of the drug at the time. This week's decision overturned Kaufman's ruling and sends the case back to the trial court level. The California courts decided earlier this year that SB 420, the bill that limited patients to 8 ounces, was unconstitutional because the legislature does not have the authority to amend an initiative passed by the people. They've also given quite a bit of deference to the doctor-patient relationship and resisted attempts by lawmakers to thwart medical marijuana, like we saw in the decision last week in San Diego, forcing that county to issue state-mandated medical marijuana ID cards. If only our federal courts were so understanding. Positive local buzz from marijuana bill surprises Representative Clay of Missouri. From thehill.com. Representative Lacey Clay didn't intend to sign on to a bill legalizing marijuana, but he's happy so far with the buzz from constituents. The Missouri Democrat was flying with Representative Barney Frank of Massachusetts on a congressional trip to Africa earlier this year, when Frank asked Clay to co-sponsor his marijuana bill. It seemed like a simple request to Clay, who for years had signed on to bills to legalize marijuana for medical purposes, so his answer was no problem. He called on his staff and told them to put his name on the bill. Only later did he find out that the bill went far beyond medical marijuana. Frank's bill would end all prosecution of the personal use of marijuana, and Clay was one of only 7 sponsors. Clay was worried about the reaction. Supporting the liberalization of marijuana laws is not often seen as a political winner, especially in Midwestern cities like St. Louis. But instead of stoner jokes, derision, and righteous indignation, Clay was surprised to start getting praise from complete strangers. Clay said, quote, "People are coming up to me saying this is a common sense, sensible way to deal with the issue of personal use," end quote. So far, he said, his calls, mail, and contacts are running 80-20 in favor of the bill. He was impressed enough that he decided to go ahead and step before the cameras last week with Frank and Representative Barbara Lee, Democrat of California, at a news conference touting the bill. This is exactly what Representative Frank was talking about in our Friday interview. The people are way ahead of the politicians on this one. Please call your congressperson at 202-224-3121 and ask him or her to co-sponsor, or at least support, Barney Frank's H.R. 5843. The calls really do matter. Many of these legislators are smart enough to know that marijuana prohibition has failed, but like Representative Clay, are afraid of what the backlash may be back home. Some of you may have a Republican or a conservative Democrat as a representative who will turn off immediately to anything involving marijuana. Call anyway. When I was living back in Idaho, represented by Republicans at the city, county, state, and federal level, I used to try to find an angle that would slip past their prejudice. You know, something like, "I just wanted to call you about this bill by Barney Frank to legalize marijuana. You know, I think that dope is stupid and people that do dope are stupid, but hell, if we outlaw stupidity, we'd have to lock up most everybody at some point. Maybe we ought to try this thing so that we're not spending a bunch of my tax dollars busting baggy pants skateboarders for a joint when we could spend that time and money busting all those meth freaks ripping the metal off the bridges." Now, you know that I don't think dope is stupid and I have nothing but compassion for meth addicts, right? But they don't have to know that. If I act as if I'm coming from their point of view, maybe I can open them up a little bit to at least talk about it and force them to defend the status quo. Argentine president calls for decriminalization of drug use. Buenos Aires, Argentina. President Cristina Fernández de Kirchner repeated her call this week to decriminalize personal drug use and crack down on traffickers and dealers. Quote, I don't like it when people easily condemn someone who has an addiction as if he were a criminal, as if he were a person who should be persecuted, end quote. She told a meeting of the National Investigation into the Consumption of Alcohol, Tobacco, Psychopharmaceuticals, and Illegal Drugs. She added, quote, those who should be persecuted are those who sell the substances, those who give it away, those who traffic in it, end quote. Studies and evidence have shown that decriminalization of drug possession does not lead to an increase in drug use. It really makes sense if you think about it. Once the drug has made it to the user's hand, it's a little too late to try to deter his use through the criminal penalty. President Fernández de Kirchner is joining many European leaders and 7 of our own congresspersons in calling for a sensible end to locking up people for their personal use of one drug or another.
Hello, I'm Paul Stanford from the Hemp and Cannabis Foundation, or THCF. Medical marijuana is legal in 12 states today, and THCF has medical clinics in 6 of those states. Our physicians help qualified patients obtain an authorization for medical marijuana in their state. Patients are eligible for medical marijuana with a history of either severe chronic pain and or nausea, cancer, AIDS or HIV, hepatitis, glaucoma, seizure disorders like epilepsy, chronic muscle spasms as in multiple sclerosis or asthma, neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's, and gastrointestinal disorders like IBS or Crohn's disease. If you or someone you know has one of these conditions, our doctors will help them obtain a permit for medical marijuana. THCF Medical Clinics has offices in Washington State, Oregon, Colorado, Nevada, Hawaii, and California. Call 1-800-723-0188 or go to the web at www.hemp.org or 1-800-723-0188.
The National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws is the largest grassroots drug law reform organization in America. So every Monday we visit with the activists in drug law reform who are fighting for our freedom. Get motivated to get it regulated. Join us in some political activism today. You can start by visiting NORML.org. We're joined now by Chris Crane, who's the Executive Director of the Students for Sensible Drug Policy, with some more news from Washington, D.C. Chris, welcome back to the Daily Audio Stash.
Thanks for having me on. It's always a pleasure.
You know, a lot of the problems that we have in this stupid war on marijuana and the effects of marijuana prohibition don't often have to do with being locked up for marijuana. You know, a lot of our opponents will say, well, you know, a lot of people aren't really locked up for marijuana, but it's the consequences of those marijuana arrests that can have such a influence on a person's life. And nowhere is that more prevalent than when we talk about college students. And of course, as the Executive Director of Students for Sensible Drug Policy, that would be your area of expertise. And the thing we've been focusing on a lot is that aid elimination penalty. Let's let our listeners know what is the latest news on that situation.
Well, for those who don't know, the aid elimination penalty is a provision in the overall Higher Education Act, which is the law that governs all financial aid issues in the country. The aid elimination penalty is a provision within the Higher Education Act that automatically strips financial aid eligibility for any student with a drug conviction. And that includes convictions for even minor marijuana possession, and the length of time for which a student is denied aid based on that conviction varies depending on the nature of the conviction, whether it's for distribution or possession, and whether you have prior convictions on your records. You can be denied aid from anywhere between 1 year and indefinitely, depending on the nature of the offense and the number of convictions you have prior. Now, our best chance at fully repealing this law just sort of came and went with the Higher Education Act's reauthorization process. For those not familiar with it, essentially what happens is it's supposed to be every 5 to 7 years, the Higher Education Act has to be reauthorized by Congress, where they get to rework all the financial aid provisions, adjust it to sort of the modern situation and so forth. And in doing so, we were very hopeful that Congress would remove the language from the Higher Education Act that denies financial aid to students with drug convictions. Unfortunately, that process did just finish, and they did reauthorize the Higher Education Act without repealing this penalty that has to date caused over 200,000 students to either lose or be denied financial aid on the basis of a drug conviction.
Wow, this is a terrible thing. And how do you think that people in the Congress aren't willing to go the extra distance here to repeal this? Is it an election year problem? They're afraid of being painted as soft on drugs or something?
That's absolutely correct, and in fact, that's exactly what we were told by staffers of the Democratic leadership in Congress. What we were told was that this became a big sticking issue for Souder and some other members of Congress, that they threatened to run attack ads against the Democrats if they push this, and that they threatened to blow up the entire reauthorization process over this issue. And so, in the end, they decided to leave the provision as is, even though we know that many of the Democratic leaders in Congress are very much in support of repealing the provision and did work very hard behind the scenes to get it done. In the end, they were unable to overcome that opposition because they wanted it to be bipartisan, and they were worried about attack ads.
Wow. It's sad to see that there's so many people that are, well, maybe not so many, but a few dedicated people that want to continue to punish college students who might use marijuana. And to see that happening at the same time that the U.S. military is lowering its standards to accept people that have previous drug convictions, it's hard sometimes not to try to draw a line between the two of those features.
I think you make an excellent point there. For those who don't know, just recently, in fact, last year, the military did loosen their restrictions or guidelines for joining the military. It used to be that if you had a drug conviction on your record, it was very hard to join the military. But with recruitment levels lagging, with wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and so forth, they actually waived that requirement. So now we're looking at a situation where an 18-year-old who is convicted of marijuana possession offense is basically told that they cannot go to college because they were busted for a small amount of pot. But if they want to turn their life around, they can still join the military. Now, this is certainly not to disparage the military, and I actually think that it's a good thing that the military did remove this requirement. I think if somebody wants to go and serve their country, to serve their country by serving in the military and do a very honorable thing, that they absolutely should have the right to do so, and that a minor drug conviction shouldn't get in their way. However, we also feel that if that young person wants to turn their life around and go to college, that they shouldn't have that opportunity stripped from them because of a drug conviction as well. It shouldn't be a choice between you can't go to college, so you have to go to the military. Young people should have the choice to do whatever they want to better advance themselves and their futures, whether that's joining the military and serving their country admirably or going to college and getting a degree.
That's right. If you're good enough for the military, you're good enough for college, I would
Absolutely.
figure. Now, the other thing we ought to point out, if people haven't followed this issue very closely, is the fact that when we're talking about this aid elimination penalty and taking away college students, federal grants, Pell Grants, federally backed student loans, and so on, this is only for drug convictions. It's not for anything, plagiarism, murder, anything else, right?
That's absolutely correct. You cannot have your financial aid revoked as a condition of, or you cannot have your financial aid revoked as a condition of a conviction, any conviction. In fact, if the federal government is prohibited from asking on the financial aid form whether or not somebody has been convicted of anything other than drug offense, and yet they're mandated by Congress to ask whether or not you've been convicted of a drug offense. And if you answer yes to that question, then you automatically have your aid revoked for anywhere from a year to indefinitely.
I can imagine that this also would have some unintended consequences within the student population. There's going to be kids at school, young adults at school, that are using marijuana and maybe even some other drugs. And if there's a problem, if a kid has an overdose on one of these harder drugs, I would imagine that the student population would be a little less likely to want to get any authorities involved, knowing that could get them kicked out of school.
Actually, I think you raise an excellent point there, that, yes, if a student is having a problem with drugs, I would say, or alcohol, but in this case, of course, alcohol offenders, even though drinking alcohol under 21 is illegal, they are exempted from this policy. But if somebody is having, a substance abuse problem or an overdose issue, I think students will be much less likely to call for help because they're worried that that student will get in trouble, will get arrested, and will then lose their financial aid and be forced to drop out of college. And in fact, that we would use to make the case that more schools around the country need to adopt what's referred to as a Good Samaritan policy. And this is something that SSDP chapters have been pushing on college campuses all around the country. And in fact, we've had about somewhere between 8 and 10 of them enacted just in the last year or so. And this is a policy that says if somebody is if a student is overdosing on either drugs or alcohol, and in this case, the vast majority are alcohol-related, that they can call campus security for help, or their friends can call campus security for help, for medical assistance, and that both the friend who called for assistance and the student who is overdosing will not be punished for the underlying drug or alcohol violation.
This is great work that we're doing in the student community, and if you're really interested in getting involved with this, get involved with Chris's organization, the Students for Sensible Drug Policy. You can find them online at ssdp.org. Now, Chris, with regards to this aid elimination penalty and the whole Higher Education Act, you said it is reauthorized every 5 to 7 years, so we're looking at the next possibility being in 2013 to be able to do something about this?
Well, it's by law supposed to be reauthorized every 5 to 7 years. It actually took 10 years since the last time it happened. The last time it happened was in 1998, which is when the aid elimination penalty was inserted into the Higher Education Act. So, at the pace that Congress goes, I think 5 years to 7 years would actually be wishful thinking. It'll likely be a little bit longer than that. However, that doesn't mean that this is a dead issue or that we can't get it repealed in other ways. We are currently reevaluating our strategy for next year. We are going to be pushing for full repeal through a number of other measures. I should note that Barney Frank currently has a bill that's pending in Congress called the RISE Act, the Removing Impediments to Students' Education Act, that would repeal this penalty outright. That bill currently has 86 co-sponsors in the House of Representatives, and Senator Chris Dodd has introduced language in the Senate that has 4 Senate co-sponsors currently that while it wouldn't repeal the penalty outright, it would give discretion to judges to revoke financial aid as a condition of sentencing rather than revoking financial aid from students outright. We'll also be looking at some other creative ways to go about this that doesn't go through the HEA reauthorization process, maybe through an appropriations bill that would prevent the Department of Education from spending money enforcing this policy. And there may even be a way to get this done administratively through the Department of Education, particularly in a new administration that may be more sympathetic to our position. That would effectively get rid of the penalty. So just because we're looking at another, 5 to 10 years before reauthorization comes up, again, we still have a very good chance at getting this done through a variety of other methods, and of course we'll be evaluating that over the course of the coming year.
It's a lot of great work you're doing out there, and all that information on the bills can be found at ssdp.org, so I can encourage everyone to get out there.
Before I go, I'd like to put in a pitch that if you do visit the website, ssdp.org, or schoolsnotprisons.com, that's easy to remember, goes to the same site. By later this afternoon or tomorrow, we'll have a banner up on our featured action site, which is encouraging people to write their legislators and tell them their position on this issue. And so what we're trying to do is to send a clear message from constituents to their members of Congress that if you support common sense drug policy reform, like repealing the aid elimination penalty, that not only will it not hurt you in the upcoming election, but it'll actually help you. If they don't support repealing this penalty, that it's not only going to that they're not only going to not have to worry about attack ads, but that if they don't support this repeal, that it's going to hurt them in the upcoming election. And we need to send that message loud and clear. So I urge everybody to go to the website schoolsnotprisons.com and send a letter to your member of Congress urging their support for this very important action.
Chris Crane is the executive director of SSDP, who joins us from Washington, D.C., and that all rhymes. Thank you for your time, sir.
No problem.
76% of Americans no longer support arresting and jailing marijuana smokers, and nearly as many support the medical patients having access to medical marijuana. And over 80% of our citizens now believe the war on drugs is an ineffective failure. So the question is, when will the government's misguided war on adult marijuana smokers finally end? When? Simple. When you and your like-minded friends, family, and coworkers get involved with an organization such as the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, also known as NORML. My name is Keith Stropp, and I founded the organization in 1970. Contact us at NORML, toll-free, 888-67-NORML, or by visiting the organization's up-to-date webpage at www.normal.org.
Here at the NORML Daily Audio Stash, we work hard to change our nation's marijuana laws through education and discussion. But we also take time to relax and unwind with an eclectic mix of pod-safe music from many independent artists. We look for music that speaks to the growing truth about cannabis, or music that speaks to broader themes of freedom, liberty, social justice, equality, and protest. To find out more about the artists and download the music you hear on this podcast, just log on to stash.normal.org. And if you'd like to get your music heard by the online cannabis community, just send us an email at stash@normal.org. Welcome to Blue Monday, Stashers. We have some great blues today from artist Don Nix and his guitar-heavy rock and roll blues song, One Step Ahead of the Blues. Don is a writer, producer, and kick-ass blues man whose music has been recorded by Stevie Ray Vaughan, John Lee Hooker, Deep Purple, and Pearl Jam. As a producer, he has worked with artists such as Leon Russell, Gary Lewis, John Mayall, and George Harrison. He collaborated with Harrison and Russell on the production of the star-studded 1971 benefit, The Concert for Bangladesh. Indeed, Don Nix has been a key figure in several genres of Southern blues and was instrumental in the creation of the trademark Memphis Soul. Today's track comes in his 10th and latest album that he self-produced, I Don't Want No Trouble, recorded in 2007 in Memphis. I know what keeps me one step ahead of the blues, and I certainly don't want no trouble enjoying that. You can learn more about the artist and his album, I Don't Want No Trouble, by checking out our blog at stash.normal.org, where we also have links to download the MP3 of this song. It's Don Nix with One Step Ahead of the Blues.
Worry drive a man insane. I can't work, I can't eat. Got to keep moving, staying on my feet. Gotta keep picking up these shoes. Gotta stay one step ahead of the blues. I've been up, I've been down, I've been all around this town, searching for what I can't find. Guess I've just been wasting my time. Gotta keep picking up these shoes. Gotta stay one step ahead of the
National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, known as NORML, has worked for over 30 years to change the misguided cannabis prohibition that has been a scourge to the public health and safety of our nation. NORML's efforts are highlighted by frequent legal and legislative success, creating the growing dialogue with elected officials and law enforcement. For more information about marijuana and to find out what you can do to help end prohibition, contact the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws at NORML.org or toll free at 888-67-NORML.
And now we conclude our interview with Wendy Chapkus, Richard Webb, and Valerie Corral on the book Dying to Get High, which chronicles medical marijuana and its advent in California through Proposition 215, with a specific look at Valerie Corral's collective, WHAM, the Women's Alliance for Medical Marijuana. We begin with Valerie continuing her story.
Interestingly, this last July, I was invited to speak before Congress at the House Judiciary, and it was quite an amazing experience. I looked over my shoulder, and there were a few DEA agents, and I had a drink of water, and looked back, and there were about 30 to 40 DEA sitting over my right shoulder, and I kind of gave a little weak smile and a wave, and thought to myself, how funny, how strange. The last time I saw 30 DEA agents, I was on the other side of the gun. And now, 5 years later, I'm sitting at the table with DEA agents as they speak about the harm that we're causing. And as we recognize that the true harm is in the lack of participation by our government, really by Congress, to speak to and honor the wishes of people who are dying. I mean, it's not just, I want to, make a wish foundation. Which is a fabulous foundation. I don't mean to put that down. I'm just saying it's the idea that one's suffering could be lessened, that one's consciousness could be opened, and be that a moment of life could be richer, is compelling enough and should be compelling enough to change the mind of anyone. And what I ask often of any agent or anyone who does not recognize or thinks that we recognize the potential for marijuana as a medicine, or thinks that we by some chance are pretending to be made well or better, just to spend one day with me, one day, or even 1 hour by the bedside of someone who's dying. And I promise that life and your understanding of it would be very different.
Absolutely. I've been there.
Can I interject, Russ?
Absolutely, Wendy.
One of the things that I think is interesting about Dying to Get High, about our book, is that there's a chapter that takes on front and center the question of the possible therapeutic value of the high in cannabis, because I think one of the things that the medical marijuana movement has been very apprehensive about is talking about the consciousness-altering properties of cannabis. There's enough, problems trying to get this understood as a medicine without throwing that in there, and we thought, but we really do need to talk about that, because one of the things that we heard when we interviewed patients is what Valerie's talking about. When you're at the bedside of somebody who is dying and they are dealing with a whole range of physical problems, they are probably also dealing with a whole range of emotional issues, the anxiety of impending death. And something a lot of the people that we did interviews with talk about is the value of the consciousness-altering properties of cannabis in helping them in those very, very anxiety-producing moments. And I saw that. I witnessed that. Also, people who are very ill, who are living with chronic pain, talked about the fact that the consciousness-altering properties of marijuana allowed them to get some distance from the pain. Mm-hmm. People who were dealing with chemotherapies of various kinds for cancer or AIDS talked about the way that cannabis allowed them to regain a sense of wellness, which is directly impacted by taking drugs that make you feel so lousy, the pharmaceutical drugs. So we wanted to talk directly about that issue that is used so often to discredit marijuana as a medicine. It's one of the reasons the book is called Dying to Get High, that in this instance, marijuana is often discredited as simply a drug that people use to get high, and we wanted to think seriously about, well, what does it mean to say that getting high itself might have therapeutic properties, in addition to all of the other medicinal properties that cannabis appears to have, like reducing ocular pressure and increasing appetite and controlling seizures and so forth. But to look at precisely that highly stigmatized element of marijuana and talk seriously about it.
Yeah, I'm glad that you do too, because that's something that I've been considering a lot in working with medical marijuana patients here. Is we see a lot of the pharmaceutical industry and the government working toward research to synthesize cannabis and to be able to. It seems like their goal is to take the high out of it. Say, okay, it helps pain or it helps spasticity, but let's take the high out of it, as if the high is a bad thing. So the fact that you would focus on that in a therapeutic context, I think, is a remarkable thing.
Yeah, I think it's important. I think it's an important part of the story that needs to be told. The other thing that I think is pretty riveting in the books, Al just talked about it, was the DEA raid in 2002 up on the Corrals property, in which Valerie and Michael were arrested and the crop was seized and so forth. And Val and Mike give an absolutely riveting account of the raid. I mean, fairly terrifying, having armed government agents bust into your home and hold you at gunpoint. And then the way the organization rallied after that and refused to back down and was joined by the local government. We have interviews with elected officials, with the local sheriff. It's quite an amazing story of human courage.
Absolutely. And just, is that me? Nope. That happens, and thank goodness for editing. Now, just to kind of wrap things up here, Valerie spoke a lot about the revolution and how this is a revolutionary approach. And I see a lot of parallels also in how this is, well, maybe not parallels, but how this ties along with what seems to be a green revolution and getting away from industrialization and returning to more natural type of remedies and foods and organic materials and so on. Did you find that to be true in researching this book? Do you see the WHAM Collective and the medical marijuana movement in particular as a revolutionary act in a greater sense for humanity as a whole?
Well, we do have a whole chapter called The Greening of Modern Medicine, which talks specifically about how the rise of cannabis it must be located in the context of the rise of alternative and complementary medicine, and the renewed interest in herbal medicines, in alternative modalities for healing and so forth. And I do think that's a revolution, and I think that it is a huge threat to the sort of more conventional pharmaceuticalized forms of medicine. I actually think it's fascinating that they keep arguing that cannabis has no therapeutic properties, while the pharmaceutical companies are rushing to figure out what the therapeutic properties are of cannabinoids so that they can pharmaceuticalize them. And you get those interesting situations where people who were working for the U.S. government on the prohibition of marijuana as medicine are now working for some of the pharmaceutical industries, trying to figure out ways to pharmaceuticalize that. So I think that is a sign for me that we are very much in the midst of a power struggle over who is going to control this medicine.
Mm. Yeah, and the book for everyone is Dying to Get High, and if you want to learn more about the book, go out to Google and type in Dying to Get High. There's a great review the introduction for the book, I should say, under the New York University Press. So it should show up on the top of the Google search when you go there. For more information on the Women's Alliance of Medical Marijuana, that's at wham.org, WAMM.org. Also check out the MySpace page at myspace.com/SCWAM. That's SCWAMM. And I want to thank Wendy Chapkus from the University of Southern Maine, Richard Webb, who's with Communication Studies at San Jose State University. They're both the co-authors of Dying to Get High. And, of course, Valerie Corral, the founder of WHAM, for joining us here on the Daily Audio Stash. Thanks to all of you for enlightening us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for the chance, Russ.
Thank you so much, Russ.
Thank you for downloading the NORML Daily Audio Stash, the growing truth about cannabis. We are produced by the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws in Washington, D.C. Our executive producer is Alan St. Pierre. Our deputy director is Paul Armentano. Our webmaster is Brian Judy. And web production is provided by Red Aphid Interactive Media. As always, you can catch up on the latest information about marijuana at www.norml.org. And you can interact and download from our Audio Stash blog at stash.norml.org. For everyone here at NORML, I'm your host, Radical Russ Belville, hoping all your harvests are bountiful and your encounters with law enforcement are non-existent. We leave you today with another one of our cannabis quotes. This one comes from the New York Times from 1933, and it's another example of the racism inherent in reefer madness. Quote,
"Marijuana is highly intoxicating and constitutes an ever-recurring problem where there are Mexicans or Spanish Americans of the lower classes."
End quote. That's right, they had to call it marijuana in order to prohibit it because everybody knew that cannabis, hemp, was a good thing. So they used a Mexican slang term to prey on people's fear of others. And that continues today. We can see it in the disproportionate use of the drug war and how it impacts communities of color. You can get involved and help to do something about this by joining NORML at norml.org. I'm Radical Russ. Thanks for joining us for the Daily Audio Stash today. We'll be back tomorrow with more news and interviews you can use for the cannabis community. And until next time, take care of each other, tokers.